I'd like to introduce the panelists, and I will start with the moderator. The moderator for this evening is Mr. Soji Apampa. He is the leader of thought on the subject of change and institutions, where he has demonstrated visionary leadership, creativity, and effective implementation of his ideas. Mr. Apampa has championed the concept of finding viable alternatives to corruption as route to markets, finance, and know-how as a way of dealing with the problem. In concrete terms, over the last 4 years, he has been country director for the Business Innovation Facility that provides technical assistance to companies implementing inclusive business models targeted at supporting people at the base of the economic pyramid as suppliers, consumers, distributors, employees, and so on. He is co-founder of the Integrity Organization and has helped to make the strategy of empowering people, their transactions, systems, and institutions against corruption relevant to Nigeria. At Integrity, he was one of the initiators of the Convention on Business Integrity. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, our moderator for this session, Mr. Soji Apampa, Executive Director of Integrity Organization. I'd also like to introduce Professor Bolaji Owasonye, a social legal rights advocate and legal consultant with about 30 years' experience in legal and social development, combining his work as professor of law at the Nigeria Institute of Advanced Legal Studies with a portfolio of activities in social legal development. He is currently member of the International Bar Association, Presidential Task Force on Human Trafficking, and in the year 2000, he was appointed Senior Special Fellow of the United Nations Institute for Training and Research. Through Human Development Initiatives, HDI, the not-for-profit and consulting organization which he co-founded, he has implemented over 40 social development and advocacy projects focusing on legal and psycho-social needs of the poor, human rights, rule of law, legal reform, and governance, especially anti-corruption. He is a member and executive secretary of the Presidential Advisory Committee Against Corruption. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, Professor Bolaji Owasonye. Also with us is Mr. Frank Aigbogun. This gentleman is the publisher of Business Day newspaper. Mr. Aigbogun began his journalism career at the Lagos Guardian newspaper and also served as the Lagos correspondent of the Associated Press. Mr. Aigbogun was both a member and alternate rapporteur for the Subcommittee on Competition and Commercialization of the Vision 2010 and has served on the board of the Nigerian Competitiveness Council. He is a director of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, NESG, and an alumnus of the Lagos Business School. Mr. Frank Aigbogun. And last but certainly not least is Mr. Okpayemi Agbaje, a strategy and business consultant, a former head of strategy, entrepreneurship, and business environment at the Lagos Business School, a product of the great university in Osun State. Okpayemi Agbaje is a truly multi-talented and multi-skilled professional that derives great pleasure in business, geopolitics, national development, and political science. He seeks a developmental, prosperous, and knowledgeable Nigerian state. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, your panelists, and I hand you over to the moderator, Mr. Soji Apampa.
Thank you very much. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we're not going to make this a long panel, but I think that the keynote speaker has raised a number of very important issues. I particularly liked the suggestion that integrity is useless if it's on its own, and that integrity has to be accompanied by structures that individuals are unable to circumvent for you to have confidence in that integrity. So, I don't know, and this is a question to the panelists, and I'll give them each a few minutes to to respond to the keynote in any way that they would like, but I'm wondering, how do you create integrity with structures as an individual or as a company or as a country? What is it that we have to do? Maybe Mr.
Let me take that, because I was speaking a few days ago at the presidential Committee Against Corruption event in Abuja, and I said something that comes immediately out of what the keynote speaker said. I said we need structural solutions in this war against corruption. Let me give you an example. Today, Nigerians forget that one sector of the economy that was controlled by government, communications, that's where the richest Nigerian of our youth, MKO Abiola, made his money as a government contractor. That's where everybody who was an executive director at NITEL was immediately a millionaire or multimillionaire. That's where anybody who had the good fortune of being appointed Minister for Communications could be presumed to be a billionaire. That was one of the sectors of the Nigerian economy. And yet, that sector delivered over a 50-year period, of course, because of corruption, only about 400,000 telephone lines. And then we took structural solutions. So we wrote a policy document. We examined the structure of the industry. We didn't spend a naira. We didn't put anybody in jail. Maybe we should have. We didn't fight any war against corruption in the telecom sector. We didn't chase anybody with EFCC. We simply reviewed the sector, wrote a policy document, advised the world we were going to have an auction. And, I'm sure very few people make money, corrupt money, from government in the communications sector. In fact, if you're a minister for communications, I really don't know what you do. So the point is, and we could apply that across. So when it says it's structures. We need that perspective. And that's what companies do. That's what, in the private sector, those companies that are seen to be organizations with integrity, what they do is simply create structures that control behavior. It may include culture. It may include a value system. But certainly they create structures. And I would say that for me, the key point that came out of that conversation is that we need to begin to focus our anti-corruption effort on institutions and structures. Thank you.
Okay. Yes. Let me just add a little bit to that. Of course, I agree that creating structures and improving the structures will help diminish corruption. When Oliver Blake was speaking, he talked about sanction systems and societies. I would reverse it and say societies, systems, and sanctions. Now, there are two key things, and I think the keynoter alluded to both, that make people to behave or self-regulate. Two key things, and we have a challenge with both in Nigeria, and we need to also address them. The first is the fear of God or the fear of law. It's one of two things. In developed countries, they don't fear God, but they fear law. In Nigeria, in spite of all of our pretensions, we don't fear God, we don't fear law. So that's a big problem. And that's why the focus about societies is very critical. Looking at what exactly is it in us, for example, that when your townsman is arrested for corruption and is to be charged to court on Monday, before Monday, you also, Ashwebi, get drummers and you accompany him to court, drumming, not asking him to prove his innocence, but saying, why him? Why him? So while I agree and accept that structures are important, we must also recognize that dysfunctional societies can either weaken structures or make it more difficult for structures, to be established or put in place. Good example with telecoms. Very good example. But what has since happened in other sectors where we have struggled to replicate the telecoms model. It has not worked as well. Now, I'm not saying that is not to diminish the structures argument. I support and I accept it. I think that it then goes back to, first, we need to look at society. Because when you understand the society, you then also will understand the kind of structures that you need to put in place, the kinds of structures that will stand, of course, and also deliver the result that you expect from whatever reforms that you do. One final quick one. We should also recognize that, some of these things are sometimes mutually reinforcing. Take, for example, we're talking about does business integrity matter? And is there a business case for integrity? Of course, there's a business case for integrity. If you undermine, let's say, for example, in business, you don't act above board, you cut corners, there's a high level of corruption. One of the ways that society responds is by creating more regulation, by creating more laws, in order to rein in the problem that has been created by the absence of integrity. Now, of course, what that then does is that it creates more room for corruption, because then there will be more roadblocks. So we have a situation whereby more regulation creates more bureaucracies, and with those bureaucracies come human toll gates and rent seekers who make things more difficult for you. So we're looking at a mutually reinforcing system, and in creating structures, you must focus on those. And that's why I say societies come first. We need to understand and break it down. What are we dealing with so that we can know how to respond to it?
I think Wale really touched at the heart of it. Structure is very important. But perhaps let me start by saying that, yes, business integrity matters. And I think he provided, enough examples to persuade anyone who was still in doubt. And even in our own personal lives as well, I think integrity does matter. Now, the point about structure, as a journalist, I have always been a pro-privatization person. And frequently my colleagues who found my position quite unusual would ask me, why is it that I am so keen to promote privatization, which they thought was selling the assets of many to just a handful of people? And the point I always made was about corruption. And I always said that if we were to privatize, considerably in Nigeria, without firing a bullet, we would deal a severe blow at corruption. And the point has been made about what has happened in the area of communication. When I started journalism at The Guardian, the first beat that I was attached to was the P&T those days, when Audu Ogbe was minister. And over the years, I followed with visits. And I think it even got worse when you then had what they called, was it Nitel or Net? I can't remember what it was called. And you go there as a reporter early in the morning, and all you'll find will be these gaily dressed people from all over the country, but from a particular part of the country, just lining up and waiting to see the chief executive so they can walk away with their own piece of paper. Today, in fact, I think the chairman of MTN is here. I think MTN will pay you today to collect a SIM card. You don't have to bribe anyone to collect a SIM card or to buy a SIM card today. So I think the point is made. And perhaps we should do more of it. I'm not exactly sure that it is true that if we have not been able to replicate what has happened in communication, it's because we call to question this whole idea of putting proper structures in place. I think perhaps we can look at the context maybe at another debate.
Okay. I'm hearing that at least there's agreement in the panel that integrity will be very, very difficult to uphold without a certain level of structure beneath it. And we can see how this can help at the country level, how this can even help at the sector level. But when we get to the level of individual firms and individuals within society, how do we replicate this structure? We can see how through maybe policy, you could use policy to bring in a level of integrity. So it's integrity by design. But how do you do that in the lives of in the life of an individual? There was something that the keynote speaker also mentioned, that it is not enough to have the results, that the process is just as important as the result. Is this a place that we could look as well?
Let me talk about the context of course, in my welcome address, I used the context of Dr. Kolade, which we are proud at CBI to always use. But let's look at companies. I mean, I worked in the financial sector, and I could describe the internal workings of practically every bank in Nigeria. I was group head financial institutions. So most of the banks were my clients. I knew them in detail. There's no doubt in my mind, and I've said this even in the context of my consulting work and in the context of teaching, that if you want to look at the attributes that have distinguished the financial institutions that have excelled over a sustainable period of time, and I won't do any free advertising for any of them, but the ingredients you will find are professionalism, corporate governance, and integrity. I mean, that's corporate governance. And the elements you will find, the building blocks you will find to how those results happen is process. So, for instance, I mean, as a banker in Guarantee Trust Bank, I don't think, and I spent 10 years in that, I can't recall an occasion in which I know that there are times I told my CEO that, no, I don't think we should do that credit. And that was the decision. You say we shouldn't do it, and that was the end of that credit. Because I was the closest. At times I could have been an assistant manager, at some point maybe a manager, maybe an assistant general manager. But so there was a process. There was openness. There was transparency. In short, there were structures that enabled that institution to have openness around decision making, such that I couldn't collect a bribe from someone to process his credit because I couldn't guarantee his credit was going to be passed at the credit committee. It was going to be a fierce debate, an open debate. So that's still the point around structures. And if any customer was foolish enough to give me money to process his credit, he was just wasting his money. Because I was going to have to do a very good credit write-up. I was going to have to pass it through experts, difficult people. I mean, tired. And so it was structures. And so that's the company context. And you could replicate that in many other industries. Those entities, Nigerian entities that have prospered over the last 3 to 4 decades, without fail, if you look at each of them, and there were fly-by-nights. So there were companies that came and upset the industry, and people say, oh, they are growing fast, they are bribing public sector workers. And they had maybe 6 years of a boom, and then a terrible crash. And the case studies they're clear. The case studies I have discussed from personal experience. So there's no doubt in my mind that you need integrity, you need structures around it, you need processes around it, and many of those things are consistent with what the keynote speaker said.
Prof, I'm hearing that there are some exemplary companies, but we cannot change a whole industry based on the behavior of one company. We need a critical mass of companies doing it. And I know that if some days ago you had meetings with the professional bodies, professional associations, is there anything that can be done at the level of professional bodies to try to get more companies following a pattern that can help them learn from the structures that build integrity?
Well, first, I think that while I agree that the processes of what you call systems are also critical, you need to also make them public and let the potentially vulnerable know what exactly are the right processes, so that if somebody is taking me through a shortcut, I know that this is leading me to trouble. That's number one. Number two is that I think that sectorally, professional groups or business groups must learn to isolate those who have a tendency to put the entire in trouble. As they say, one bad apple spoils the whole bunch. Now, let me link it to what Okpeyemi said about the financial services sector. I think that when we have one example that proves the point, it validates the position that this thing can work. However, when you have the majority in the sector, and I'm a skeptic in this regard, when you have the majority in the sector not doing that with that one voice alone must have the stamina, and we encourage them to have the stamina to keep the distance. Because the truth of the matter is that, let's take recent developments in the sector, in the financial services sector. Now we are hearing things coming out about banks who are not following their own processes. And we're beginning to see this so-called notion of private banking, so the use of suspense accounts and all that. Banks breaching their own internal regulations in the most mind-boggling way. Now, what has that done to us? It has demystified to some extent. And what it means is that it makes the regulator unsettled. And they begin to look a bit more closely. And then they will find what they were not looking for. And it's usually not the right thing. Because no matter how well you know how to walk, there's no way you not shake your head. Is that not so? They will find something. So the point I'm trying to make is that, yes, we need to encourage, but we need to tell ourselves that as businesses, those who have the potential to rebrand us negatively, we need to take positions against them and isolate them. Let me ask the question. And this came up when we had the meeting with the Association of Professional Bodies. Including financial services, real estate, you go looking for funds. You go to public office holders. You know that their salaries cannot support what you are offering them. You want to market a housing project. You go to a permanent secretary, or a director, or a minister who has a defined salary. He is willing to invest, and you know the money he's putting there cannot be by any stretch of imagination his money. You don't ask any question. He goes further to say, I don't want this thing in my name. You still don't ask any question. And you proceed. Now the point is, when the bubble bursts, are we supposed to only target that public officer? What about you, the real estate person, who encourage you? You are an agent provocator. What about you, the banker, who has asked for the money that you know this guy does not own? Now we need to begin to change the conversation. And that's what we are pushing for. We're saying when you've arrested the minister and the public servant and the director who has built estates that is not supported by their funds, the professionals who help them to get that far, we also need to ask them. Because somewhere along the line, they are also breaching their own code of ethics. So every time you find this kind of wrongdoing, if it's not contrary to law, it's contrary to some regulation, it's contrary to some code of ethics, it's contrary to some professional, something somewhere has been breached. And so we need to begin to look beyond that. And then that will reinforce the processes that we're putting in. So I'm saying processes are good, make them public. Let the potentially vulnerable know. Secondly, I'm saying we are moving beyond just saying, hey, the corrupt, the one who is visibly corrupt, is the only one who is corrupt. I think all those who encourage their weakness, their potentiality to be corrupt, who help to bring out that primitive culture in them, we need to focus on them as well.
Okay. Mr. Aibogun, Prof says that we need to make sure that those who are potentially vulnerable understand also what those structures are about. So they have to understand what the laws are that the people they're dealing with have to live up to. And I think that that's also what the keynote speaker was alluding to in his own definition of structures, that there must be structures that people understand and have faith in, and because of their faith in it, they're able to have faith in the integrity of the system. So I don't know how you react or respond to the statement that he made that processes that we follow are just as important as the results we get, especially as individuals or as firms.
I recall very clearly that the guest speaker even went further and said that at some point in our history, corruption was under threat, and that at some point the lines got so blurred that it was hard to even talk about corruption. In fact, there were places where you couldn't even talk about corruption. So that has to change. I mean, you can't make a mistake between light and day. And so we need, as a nation, proper communication around those ills in society that we would rather put behind us. And of course, it makes a lot of sense that the rules are there to punish those who go astray, and of course to reward those who stay within, who stay on the line. I think it's important that we need to be sure that people know, when you talk about these processes, what their recourse would be, for instance, if unintended consequences were met. And I also believe that at the individual level, I mean, we should encourage people to ask themselves the same question that we're asking today. Does business integrity matter? And I think there is an overwhelming yes, that it does indeed matter. And I'll just, round this up by drawing on a personal experience. When we were starting business 15 years ago, the first staff that we employed was the accountant. And I think it was even by coincidence that it happened. In any case, we didn't even know how to keep the figures anyway, so it made sense to have an accountant right from the beginning. We had gone to the bank to open an account, and someone said, "Do you need an accountant? I have an accountant I can recommend to you," and we employed the accountant. It turned out that a year and a half after, we needed to go to a private equity company to get more equity and capital for the business. One of the reasons they had for investing in the company was, you surprised us. That the first thing you did was to have an accountant. Even if you were going to be paying yourself the money, at least there was someone taking the records. And it turned to be a great gain for the business. Probably one of the reasons why we are there 15 years after.
Wow. We have examined, the first approach we've examined is from the keynote about the issue of structures. But what about the issue of environment? He also mentioned that if you're able to create the right kind of environment, the environment in which corruption just cannot thrive, that might be another way of promoting integrity. And maybe Mr. Ibogun will have the first word on this.
Well, I think it will be more difficult where you have, as indeed one of us has already alluded, if you have a small minority just doing the good things, and the preponderance of players in a particular sector not doing just as good, you're going to have a greater challenge, or it will be more difficult to deal with the challenge. So I think it's helpful, which is why whether it is in our own individual lives or at company levels or at government department levels, that there is some national initiative behind this.
Yes.
First, to set out very clearly what we should and what we shouldn't do. And then, of course, to put the power of the state behind whatever sanctions that are outlined. And hopefully, it will be clear as we go on that people begin to, not just by what they say, but also by what they do, associate with those, values that have been so clearly outlined. And that way, I believe it will be easier for those who already know, and we can get more compact along the way.
Okay. Can I say something on this? It's good that we're having this conversation. Usually, people will say, oh, it's the government. It's the government. But what I say is that if you are a business group and you are speaking with one voice, and you decided that in doing business with governments, we will not accept any underhand deal, the government cannot resist it. But you need to be able to speak with one voice. That's one approach in creating the kind of environment you want. I was saying to the quantity surveyors, for example, I said to them, you cannot steal big money in this country without tying it to projects. Usually construction projects that don't exist, that are under-delivered, etc. Now, the one key professional in that whole setup is a cost and management quantities person. Now, I said if government wants to build a road from here to that door, and they say we are delivering this road for $10 billion naira, what stops you as a professional body, in the interest of the public, to do your own costing and say this thing can be built for $1 billion? As a lawyer, I do it. It's called public interest litigation. It's not my business. But I'm saying what is happening here, what goes round comes round. I run an NGO. I've been running one for 20 years. You go there and you begin to make a lot of trouble that can change things. Why can't professionals do that? What's wrong with that? That's also changing the environment. So when we're talking about changing the environment, it's not the government alone that will or can or must change the environment. Business people can set standards and say, below this threshold, we will not go. Now, one of the reasons investors don't come to Nigeria is not necessarily only the absence of infrastructure. It's the absence of an integrity environment. The problem of infrastructure they can deal with. There's no road from here to there. Okay, fine, no problem. I will add road to the cost of doing business. There's no electricity, I will add it. But how do you quantify the roadblocks of human beings, like the example given by the keynoter? Somebody wants to build a road, and you say, bring bribe, something that you should be doing. So that is the corruption. So you can't set your own standards and say, we will not accept this. And I think that the business sector have a great role to play in that. Like I said, a lot of protectionist tendencies cover up. Nigeria, part of our problem is a culture of silence. We are suffering under a culture of silence. People see evil, but they don't want to talk. They keep quiet. But eventually it hurts you. And we are beginning to recognize that corruption hurts all of us. It's just that the reaction may be delayed. When you are extremely vulnerable, the impact is immediate. No matter how wealthy you are, it gets to you ultimately. If it is not removed, if it's not killed, it will get you. It may take a longer time, but it will get to you. So in creating that environment, I think that the first mindset we all need is, I have a role to play. One of the challenges I face in my work on the Presidential Advisory Committee is that people expect that it's government who has the duty to do almost everything. I say, no, I don't think so. You have a role to play. Who is government anyway? You are part of government. You are, in fact, more powerful than the person that you have elected and put into office. So we need to recognize the role that we play as individuals or as business sectors or as the private sector.
Let me turn the conversation about business environment and that about structures in a direction that we perhaps do not recognize sufficiently. And that's the political and constitutional structures. So the keynote told us that in those days, if you were going from Ibadan to Iwo, Oyo, at Fiditi, there will be something there. Why didn't they steal? Yes, perhaps there's a community they affiliate with. Or let me give another example. What do you think, or what do you know happens to a gentleman who steals the money of his town union?
They don't steal that one. They don't steal that one.
Nobody dares steal the money of town union. And if anyone does, his children and his grandchildren will hear the story of how their father or grandfather stole the money of the town union. Again, why does that happen? I think we can't run away from corruption. Is at least partly attributable to the fact that government and these political systems are remote and the people do not affiliate with them. So I think there is an element of political reform and constitutional reform and examination of the structure of the country from the political. Why does Britain survive without a written constitution? We even have a written constitution and we don't obey it. So there's some element of affiliation, of buying, of solidarity with the political systems that we have. And that conversation is one that it appears we are unwilling to have, but I suspect we will continue to have suboptimal results until we'll have that conversation as well. So for me, another dimension to the environment and to all of that human community around right behavior is in terms of the constitutional and political systems.
Okay. So far, what I'm hearing from everything that has been said so far is that we need exemplars. We need icons like Dr. Christopher Kolade. We need people like Dr. Michael Omolayole. We need companies we can look up to and so on. But what I'm hearing is that is good, but it's not sufficient to get the change going at the scale that we need to get to. We also need to add structures. And the example that was given of the reform of the telecom sector and suggests that with policy, you can also make a level of change further than the exemplars that you have identified. But you've also touched on the issue of environment, making it very, very difficult for corruption to be comfortable. And somebody raised the question in the panel, but did not quite answer it, which is, why is it that professionals keep quiet when they see wrongdoing happening? In my opinion, I think the reason they do it is because they believe it can still work for them. So other people are benefiting from it now. It may be my turn tomorrow. Mm-hmm. So if I start to blow the whistle now, what will there be for me tomorrow? Because I have no confidence in the goodness or in the integrity of the system to allow me to prosper as a result of the hard work I put in. So maybe finally we can just talk a bit more from the comments that were made by Professor Owasonye about the need to stop those people who have been helping the corrupt. The professionals who have aided and abetted, should they not be totally stopped and also disgraced in the same way that the public officials who are well known are in the limelight are being disgraced for the role they've played in corruption? Yeah.
Let me kick that. Let me take that. So indeed, at Professor Bolaji's seminar 2 weeks ago, I made the point. There's one notorious case we have now in which some public office holder or political office holder gets $2 million. And then he calls this financial institution. And then it is the staff of the financial institution that takes the $2 million, calls one malam, calls one bureau de change, changes the money into naira, and invests on behalf of this gentleman. I think that we should have been prosecuting that lady and the institution. I think that, in fact, and that was a comment I made at that seminar. In my view, the primary offender is in fact that person that executed the money laundering. So sometimes, actually, professionals enter into the realm of criminality in facilitating corruption. But the system, for some reason, has refrained from prosecuting those who facilitate. And we focus, maybe because it makes better headlines, we focus only. And I'm sure Professor Oluwasoye and his colleagues are thinking along that line. I think one of the things that will begin to happen, or that should begin to happen, is that whoever facilitates corruption and the corrupt and the man who helped it should be in the dock together. And the counts should list what role each person played in that enterprise.
Well, I actually agree with you 100%, and that was why we initiated that engagement with the professionals. That hitherto, the focus had been on the politically exposed person. But clearly there were a whole host of people around them who facilitated the transaction. One of the things we found out is that you can't succeed in the kind of corruption. I mean, I abhor retail corruption as well. All kinds of corruption are bad, whether it's retail corruption or grand corruption. But you can't succeed in grand corruption without professionals helping you. It's impossible. Lawyers, accountants, bankers, real estate people, stockbrokers, all of them. These are the core people. They help you. And clearly, the matrix is shifting, and the focus is more encompassing to look at all those who have played a role. The challenge at the moment is that when corruption is so deeply endemic and systemic, you have to pick and choose your fights, number one. Number two is that with the current condition of the economy, where the government, people who have looted the country are virtually richer than the state, your first priority should be to recover the assets as much as possible. But it's not a waiver. Government has not given anybody a waiver of no prosecution. And that's just the reality of it. And beyond that is that we're beginning to also challenge professional bodies to enhance the sanctions process, just as the state is now determined to enhance the sanctions process. And in this regard, we should recognize that, yes, the state may be very weak. You may be so powerful, so dominant, so influential that the state, your own state, may be finding it difficult to immediately sanction you. But one of the outcomes and the way of the future that the London Anti-Corruption Summit brings out, there is no hiding place for you anymore. Yeah. There are different levels of sanctions. I mean, we have examples to chew from with politically exposed persons. If Nigeria does not get you, some other country will get you. Alamesia could not be convicted in Nigeria, was convicted elsewhere before he was got here. Dan Etete could not be convicted in Nigeria, was convicted in France. James Ibori could not be convicted in Nigeria, was convicted in England. And the net is widening, including, for example, travel restrictions, starting with travel. And a lot of travel restriction is happening, even to people you don't know it's happening to. They can't go to some places. They can only go in some directions for now, notably towards the east. When I say east, I'm not talking about Enugu. Dubai. But ultimately, even the door in that direction will close. Because we've seen the effect of corruption. It used to be thought that whatever you are doing in your problem is your problem. But we know that corruption escalated the insecurity in the northeastern part of Nigeria. The insecurity in the northeastern part of Nigeria has affected Niger, Chad, and Cameroon. So realistically, every country is concerned. So there's a high-level corruption going on next door, and you turn your eye and say that's their problem. The elders have a saying that when your neighbor is eating what? I don't know what he's eating. And you say this thing you are eating will create a problem tonight. When his stomach begins to make trouble, the two of you will not be able to sleep. We know that corruption is escalating illegal migration. And that's one of the reasons why our keynoter left Nigeria. An involuntary migrant, economic migrant. Is the reality. Now, those who are receiving them in large numbers will resist. And we know that migration is one of the problems with Brexit. So these things are linked. What I'm trying to say, therefore, is that if, for example, you think that Nigeria is too weak to get you, unless you have decided to live all of your life, the rest of it, in your village. And you know, thieves like to travel. They like to travel a lot. So one of the things that will be taken away from them is that freedom, quote and unquote, of movement. Recently, I was told that a Supreme Court justice going for a conference was denied visa. But the PA that was going with the Supreme Court justice was given visa. Now tell me, what is PA going to do when a guy is not going to be able to go? The message is that if Nigeria does not get you now, somebody else will.
Thank you.
Yes, I think I'd like to say that the work that Prof and his colleagues are doing, I mean, engaging with professional associations and groups, I think it's good. Because sometimes you need someone to properly articulate this whole notion that corruption is not just about someone taking something. That corruption is also about denying something to someone. And ultimately, that someone could be you that has helped to perpetrate that corruption. So I think it would be helpful, to, in fact, I would suggest that you expand, the scope of that engagement. And I don't think you should end just with
Professional bodies.
quantity surveyors and architects and those who are involved in construction, even if the point has been made already, and I agree that has the construction in Nigeria has provided a significant pipe, for a lot of the leakage.
It was with all groups of professionals, including doctors who give
nice.
false sick certificate to suspects who are supposed to be in court.
And I was also going to say that engagement would also be helpful, taken to the judiciary as well.
Oh yeah,
because I believe that for some people, there are those who have, made up their mind that they don't bother, they don't care, that they are about what is happening. But there are also those who fear genuinely that if they were to blow the whistle, if they were to make an official report, that nothing would happen, or perhaps in the extreme, the stick might go after them. And I think there are examples there to demonstrate that these things are not so straightforward. So I think that's good. I also believe that as a nation, we will need to be careful in choosing what we apply. Some people will tell you, for instance, why are you talking about privatization? There are places where government-owned establishments have worked. But the truth is that in Nigeria it hasn't worked. And so we must find things that work for us here, and even if we need to domesticate them, we should domesticate them. But I think finally, government has a role. There's absolutely no doubt at all. In fact, I think government has a leadership role here. And I don't think that role can be abdicated to anybody, whether a professional group or business interests or whatever. Yes.
Can I just add something quickly,
Yeah,
moderator?
okay.
I think that one of the things we need to do is to begin to show that corruption has victims. One of the problems here is that if, for example, you explain that somebody stole $1 billion, it doesn't mean much to people except those who are very literate and understand the value of $1 billion. So $1 billion, okay, so what? When you break it down, that $1 billion, this is what it will do. And if this money had not been stolen, this is what it could have achieved. I think that people will begin to recognize that corruption is not a victimless crime. Because in our society, people see corruption as, well, is your time. In fact, some people will say is opportunities, is time. Just like you said, yes, that those who see wrongdoing and fail to speak up is because they have an expectation of their time coming. That, well, it's Okpeyemi's time today, it's his luck. He's a minister today.
Are you using it as an example?
I will wait for my turn. But when we realize that that term may never come, especially if the person who is there now has so diminished the place that it's a fallen expectation, we really need to change the narrative, to communicate it in a way that the ordinary people will really, truly understand. So I agree also, I'm not suggesting that government should take a backseat role. I agree. I'm just saying that we also must change the mindset that this is just government's business alone. It can't be, and it's not. But obviously, government must take the lead because a fish starts to rot from the head, as they say. So the leadership, no doubt about it, that government must take the lead, but everybody also needs to back it up. And we need to break down the effect and impact of corruption. How, when the next bank that you know of is doing something wrong, how it will ultimately affect your own bank. You need to find a way of putting that in the public domain. I think then we'll begin to make the kind of progress that we want.
Okay, we have a few minutes. I don't know if we've got mics to receive some questions from the audience. Do we have mics? There are. Okay. So, yes, there's a lady on table 10 who would like to pose a question. Please just introduce yourself and let us know if it's a question for the keynote speaker or any of the panelists. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Taba Peterside, Teesside Resources. It's really a comment on the panel, and it just came out in the last two speakers. One thing that the keynote was talking about, and he ended with, was this idea of what is our national dream? Yes. That corruption is made easier if it is less palatable, if it's not just a question of saying no, but what are we saying yes to? And I think that's for me what really is missing when we talk about, we can look on a very micro level, we can look at institutions, we can look at structures, the environment. These things don't improve in a vacuum. And I'm glad that we said something at the end about the role of government, and this is where leadership comes in. I mean, what are we all being driven towards? And if the population as a whole can be galvanized around that, and if corruption can be seen as being antithetical to where we are going as a nation, I think that's a very important element that we mustn't forget.
Okay, can we have another contribution?
I am ABC Ozioko by name. I'm here on behalf of the Executive Chairman of EFCC. Okay. My contribution is very simple. One is that I very much believe that the social agents or the primary agents of socialization are not actually doing what they are expected to do. The families, the schools, and the churches are lacking in their responsibility. I say this because I have an experience to share with all of us. I'm a prosecutor. I had this matter involving a young undergraduate who was arrested for internet-related offense. And then part of the proceeds of fraud, he used to buy a Range Rover Jeep, somebody between the ages of 22 and 25, or thereabouts. Range Rover Jeep, and branded the number as something Whistle. That's the registration number of the vehicle. When he was arrested, he said the vehicle was not his, that it belongs to the mother. Behold, we went for the mother, invited the mother, and the mother came. Mother, what are you doing for a living? A petite trader that makes less than 5,000 naira in a month. So who owns this vehicle? It belongs to me because the vehicle was bought in the woman's name. How did you buy a vehicle of 18 million when you have nothing substantial to do? So I've shared this because it is worrisome that parents actually not teaching their children the right way to go. And if we are talking of integrity, we are simply discussing the sense of honesty, sense of uprightness, being able to discern between good and evil. This is lacking in the society. and parents should be able to guide their wards or children accordingly. What did I do? Out of anger, I charged the boy and I joined the mother. Painfully so, each time they're in the dock, because of my own background, I feel it because he's a mother. But because he decided to enter into the arena by making herself a principal suspect. So we felt that she was not just there to cover the son, but also to protect the proceeds of fraud. So I charged them together with conspiracy and other consequential offenses. So my message is that there is need for us to guide people who are under us and show them the right way to go. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think we've got time for one more contribution. The gentleman standing in the middle, right at the back there.
Good evening, sirs. My name is Muiwa Lucas. I write for the Nation newspaper. I have a question for the professor on the panel. And thank God the EFCC man is here. I want to ask, do you agree that plea bargaining aids corruption? Because if somebody steals, like we have seen in the past, the former IG of police and even a female banker, and all they got was 6 months, and one of them was even asked to spend the 6 months in a hospital. And then somebody that steals 200 naira goes to 6 years imprisonment. What is your take on plea bargain? Yes, I know plea bargain, you return the money. But if I steal and I return money, it doesn't serve any punishment because it doesn't have any effect on me. Thank you.
Okay. So perhaps when Prof is giving his summary, he'll respond to that. Mr. Igbogun, do you want to give us a quick 1 minute?
My 1 minute
Yes.
is not about the comments or the questions that's been asked. And
Yeah.
I think it's to just say to us that on a day like this, we need to focus on the positive. We're here to honor a man that we all love, not just because he's a great Nigerian, but because we wish we would live our lives as he has lived his own. And I think for me, that speaks to what I believe, that in the midst of the rot that we're in, there are some very good signs that can inspire quite a lot of people in Nigeria.
Okay. Thank you. Okweyin.
I'll use my 1 minute to agree with the gentleman, the prosecutor, who said the social agents are failing. And in my case, I would like to focus on religious organizations, churches, mosques, even the traditional worshippers. I think that the essence of the role that those institutions played, even in my youth, today appears to have been totally destroyed. And in fact, I would go on to say that some of them, in some way, that system may even be an agent of corruption today. So we have to carry that debate beyond government and politically exposed persons and ask ourselves about these institutions, the traditional institutions, the churches and mosques, the cultural institutions, and ask ourselves, are they playing a role befitting of their essence in society? My final comment is to also stress that question about the national dream, the corporate vision, the national vision is tied to that political and constitutional issue. And we will have to, to galvanize the people. You need a political system and a constitutional system that encompasses and connects with the people. So that will be my closing remarks.
Well, very quickly, even though nobody said anything about plea bargaining here, I think the journalist is looking for headlines for tomorrow's newspaper. But let me just tell you what plea bargaining is. It's in the law, it's in our law, But of course, it is grossly misunderstood. And one of the things we've been trying to do is to put some clarity to what it is. Let me tell you honestly, no country in the world today has the capacity to prosecute all crimes that occur in that society. In the majority of situations, they are actually plea bargained. However, at the same time, you can draw the line. Certain kinds of offenses, we will not plea bargain. We will not plea bargain. For example, nobody should plea bargain sexual offenses. For example. Now, with regard to corruption cases, what you must also recognize is that if a person gets a one-day sentence, conviction, it is a conviction. It is enough to keep them out of public office for life. The social sanction and ostracism, and the example that you gave, that I'm sure everybody in this hall knows about. How many times have you seen or read or heard publicly about that person since that incident? I think we have to recognize the effect. It is not necessarily when you put the person in jail for 20 years that you get the effect. First of all, we need to show that the law works. The sanctions regime works. 1 day, community service, 1 year, 20 years, 10 years. Let's make sure the sanctions regime works. That's the key thing. And that's why I started by saying that what regulates many societies are two key things. Is either the fear of God, which the keynote referred to. There must be something, there must be a value that you believe in that is higher than you. That when nobody else is seeing and looking, you say, no, I will not do this. It's either that or you fear the law. Say, the law will get me. But in Nigeria, it's a big problem for both. And all that has come out in this conversation. So the point I want to make is that I never suggested that government was plea bargaining off. But I'm at the same time telling you that there's plea bargaining in the law, and there are principles and policies about what will not be plea bargained. Okay, so we need to recognize all of this. My final comment, and I think I want to agree with Mr. Igbogun, that we need more examples of the kind of the honoree. You see, one of the problems here is that it's very difficult to sell the message that crime does not pay in Nigeria. It's very difficult. Because when you look all around you, it appears. I say it appears is that only the criminals are doing well. But there are many people who have proved the point that you can live a life of integrity without staining yourself. Now, we have a duty to bring them out, to celebrate them, and then some kind of social sanction to say, no matter how rich you are, we can do without you. That sanction alone, even if they are not in jail, the fact that you ignore and isolate them. You know, people who like power, when they walk in here, and you just ignore them, they'll be asking you, who is that fellow who didn't get up? Who is that fellow who didn't greet me? You know, they have an exaggerated opinion of themselves. We need to identify the kinds and the types of Dr. Kolade and celebrate them. They are there. Some of them have not had an opportunity to traverse various sectors of the economy. They may be clerks. They may be secretaries. They may be small people, but they also deserve to be identified and celebrated. And I join everybody in celebrating Dr. Kolade tonight. Thank you very much.
On a final note, what we will be taking away from here is trying to get into an exercise to articulate what is this Nigeria of our dreams. Because without a rallying vision, it doesn't matter what you do. People do not know what life is going to be like if they actually join you and stop corruption. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your attention. So we can take that.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. All protocols observed. We have all been seated here listening in or discussing the topic of the day. Does business integrity matter? I believe that each one of us is going to leave here tonight with one thing from all we have heard today. However, we would not want this to be another talk show where we encourage every one of us to purpose in his or her mind to begin to walk the talk. A very common definition of integrity is that it is doing the right thing even when no one is watching. By this, let everyone imbibe the culture of doing the right thing when no one is watching in all spheres of our daily living. By doing this, it is anticipated that each one of us becomes an ambassador of a great nation with a zero tolerance for corruption, wherein we all aim to contribute our quota to building a clean business environment. On this note, and on behalf of the Governing Board of Integrity, management and staff of the Convention on Business Integrity, first and foremost, I say a very big thank you to our very distinguished and highly esteemed Dr. Christopher Kolade, in whose honor we are gathered here tonight. We are pleased and indeed grateful for his mentorship, guidance, and leadership over the years. Our appreciation goes to His Excellency, Professor Shibajo, represented by Dr. Jumoke Oduwole. We thank her also for her presence here tonight. To the keynote speaker, Dr. Akinwale Akinyemi, and our distinguished panelists, we thank you all for your time and your valuable contributions. Our appreciation goes also to our sponsors in the bronze category, Access Bank PLC and Weatherheads Advertising Group Limited. Also to the CBI team that has always worked at putting this event together. To each and everyone present here tonight for honoring our invitation and for being a part of this event, thank you and God bless you, as we look forward to the honor of welcoming you to the 5th edition in 2017. Thank you and good night.
Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, can we please rise for the national anthem?